I read the message on my phone screen and laughed nervously. Someone clearly decided to play a joke on me on the day of Masha's wedding. The number was unfamiliar, with no name in my contacts. Don't go to your sister's wedding. Check your husband's garage.
What nonsense.
I put down the phone and continued applying my makeup. But something was bothering me. The message, like a splinter, was stuck in my head. Who could have written this? And why? Masha's wedding was supposed to start in 3 hours, and Sergey, my husband, had left earlier that morning. Said he needed to finish some work before the weekend. I put down my mascara and looked at the phone again. Maybe it was just someone's bad joke? Or perhaps someone had texted the wrong number. But why specifically the garage? We rarely used it. Sergey usually parked his car in the yard. I tried to focus on my makeup, but my hands were treacherously shaking. 15 minutes later, I was standing in front of the garage in my bathrobe and slippers, clutching a set of keys. The neighbor from the first floor gave me a strange look but said nothing. The lock on the garage was new. Sergey had changed it a month ago after some story about burglaries in the neighborhood. The key turned in the keyhole with difficulty. I pulled the heavy garage door, which began to rise with a creak. The smell of gasoline and something else that had never been in our garage before hit my nose. I felt my heart begin to beat faster. It was dark inside, and I reached for the light switch, feeling a chill run down my spine. The light didn't come on immediately. The old bulb flickered several times before illuminating the space with a dim yellowish glow. Sergey's car wasn't in the garage, but what I saw instead made me freeze in place. Suitcases stood in the corner of the garage. 2 large ones and a smaller one, the very same ones we had taken on vacation last summer. Next to them, a neat stack of documents lay. I took a few hesitant steps forward, feeling my slippers sticking to the concrete floor. On top of the documents were 2 airline tickets. I picked them up with trembling hands and stared at the text.
Barcelona. Departure tonight. 2 seats.
In the name of Sergey and
Masha,
my sister, who in 3 hours was supposed to marry another man. I sank down onto an old crate by the wall, unable to believe what was happening. This must be some mistake. There had to be an explanation.
Sergey and Masha? Impossible.
They had always been polite to each other at family gatherings, but nothing more. At least, that's what I thought. I began to sort through the documents. Among them, I found a folder with a 3-month rental agreement for an apartment in Barcelona. There were also copies of passports, Sergey's and Masha's, and some bank statements showing a large sum of money transferred to an account in a Spanish bank. My head was spinning, nausea rising in my throat. 5 years of marriage. 5 years that now collapsed like a house of cards. I tried to remember if there had been any signs, hints, oddities in his behavior. Late nights at work, business trips, sudden phone calls he would answer in another room. My gaze fell on a small box I hadn't seen before. Inside were photographs. Sergey and Masha together, in some restaurant in a park on a beach. In some pictures, they were embracing and kissing. Judging by their clothes and the backgrounds, the photos had been taken during different seasons. This had been going on for a long time. I took out my phone and dialed Sergey's number. Rings. Long, endless rings. Then the voicemail message. I tried calling Masha. Her phone was turned off. Of course, she was preparing for the wedding. Suddenly, I heard the sound of a car pulling up. The engine died right by the garage. I froze, clutching the photographs and my phone. A car door slammed, and I heard familiar footsteps. Sergey. There was nowhere to hide in the garage, and there was no point anymore. The garage door began to rise, and I saw his feet, then his torso and finally his face. He froze at the threshold, seeing me among the scattered documents and open suitcases. His face reflected a whole range of emotions, surprise, fear, and then, a strange relief. You weren't supposed to see this, he said quietly, taking a step inside. At least, not today. I stood up, clutching the photographs in my hands. Inside, everything was boiling with rage and pain. Not today? Then when, Sergey? After my sister's wedding? Or would you have sent a postcard from Barcelona? He closed the garage door behind him and now stood there, nervously rubbing his neck, a gesture that I used to find endearing, but now only filled me with disgust. We didn't want to hurt you, his voice sounded almost sincere. It's all complicated. Complicated. I threw the photographs in his face. 5 years of marriage, Sergey. And my own sister. How long has this been going on? He raised his hand as if shielding himself from my words. 1.5 years. We met by chance when you were leaving to visit your parents.
It just happened.
I laughed bitterly.
Happened?
Did the tickets to Barcelona just happen too? And the apartment for 3 months?
And the money in the account?
You planned everything.
And poor Kostya?
He loves her, he's waiting at the altar. Sergei lowered his eyes. Masha called him an hour ago. The wedding is off. These words hit me like a slap in the face. So everything was really decided. They're abandoning everything and everyone.
And it didn't occur to you to call me. My voice trembled.
Were you planning to just disappear? We wanted to tell you.
Afterward. When we'd be far away, he took a step toward me.
You would have made a scene, called our parents.
And I won't now?
I stepped back, bumping into the suitcases. Who sent me the message, Sergei? Does someone know about you too? His face changed, eyebrows furrowing. What message? I showed him my phone screen. He read it and turned pale.
I don't know. Nobody knows.
Only Masha and I. At that moment, the garage door began to rise again.
We both froze.
There stood Masha, my sister, wearing jeans and a sweater instead of a wedding dress, her hair carelessly pulled back, and makeup that she had clearly applied in a hurry. Sergei, we need to. She broke off seeing me, and turned so pale that the freckles on her face looked like splashes of mud.
Tanya?
What are you doing here? That's an interesting question. I crossed my arms over my chest, feeling a strange calmness. Especially considering that in a couple of hours you're supposed to be at the registry office.
In a white dress.
With another man. Masha exchanged glances with Sergei, then slowly entered and closed the door behind her. I cancelled everything, she said quietly.
Kostya knows.
And when was I supposed to find out? When I discovered an empty apartment. Or when Mom would call asking why my husband ran away with my sister. Masha lowered her head, and I saw what I hadn't noticed right away, a small suitcase in her hand. She had indeed come for her things, to run away with my husband. We love each other, she said so quietly that I could barely hear. We didn't want it to happen this way. But it did happen. I felt something inside me breaking completely. And you decided that running away was the best option?
We knew you wouldn't understand, Sergei interjected.
That our parents wouldn't understand. We needed time to sort everything out, to start a new life. Behind my back.
I raised my voice.
Behind the back of someone who loved you.
I looked at Masha.
Kostya didn't deserve this. I didn't deserve this. Masha raised her eyes to me, filled with tears. Tanya, I know you'll never forgive me.
But I truly love him. And he loves me.
I looked at both of them, the two people closest to me who had betrayed me in the most cruel way. And suddenly I felt a strange relief. As if a weight I hadn't been aware of had suddenly disappeared. You know what?
I straightened up.
Take your suitcases and get out. To Barcelona, to Mars, wherever you want. You deserve each other. I headed toward the exit, but stopped next to Masha. Just tell me one thing, I looked her straight in the eyes. Was it you who sent the message? Did you want me to find out? She shook her head in confusion. What message? I don't understand what you're talking about. I saw the bewilderment in her eyes. She wasn't lying. Just like Sergei a minute ago. This could only mean one thing. Someone else knew about their plan. Someone who decided to intervene. I walked out of the garage without looking back, feeling their eyes on me. The sun blinded me, and one question kept spinning in my head. Who sent me that message? And why? The answer came when I was already approaching the entrance of my building. The phone vibrated in the pocket of my robe.
The same unknown number.
I hope you checked everything. Sorry I had to do it this way. They shouldn't have done this to us.
Kostya.
I froze, rereading the message.
Kostya. Masha's fiancé.
He found out before I did. And decided that I should know the truth too. I slowly typed a response, thank you. What are you going to do now? The answer came almost instantly, the same as you.
To live on.
Without traitors. I smiled through tears. Yes, that's exactly what I was going to do.
Live on. Without them.
I went up to the apartment, mine and Sergei's apartment, which now felt foreign. Every item, every photograph on the walls, every little thing reminded me of 5 years of lies. I walked into the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, still clutching the phone in my hand.
Kostya.
Strangely, I felt a sudden connection with him, We both found ourselves on the same side of the barricades, both betrayed by the people closest to us. My gaze fell on the wedding photograph standing on the nightstand. Sergei and I, happy, smiling. Masha stood next to me in a soft blue bridesmaid dress. Her hand rested on my shoulder, and her eyes. Now I noticed what I hadn't seen before. She wasn't looking at the camera, but at Sergei. I abruptly turned the photograph face down. How many more signs had I missed? How many hints and glances had flown past my attention?
The phone vibrated again. Kostya, are you okay?
We can meet and talk if you want.
I pondered.
Meet my sister's fiancé, the one she ran away with my husband? The situation seemed absurd, but at the same time. Who would understand my feelings better than someone experiencing the same thing?
Let's do it.
In an hour at the cafe on Pushkinskaya. I replied without hesitation. I'll be waiting, came the short message. I stood up and approached the closet. I needed to change, wash off my smeared makeup, pull myself together. I wasn't going to look like a pitiful abandoned wife. Opening the door, I froze. Half of Sergei's clothes were gone. He had been preparing for his departure gradually, and I hadn't noticed anything. Or didn't want to notice. Trying not to think about it, I chose a simple black dress that always suited me well. I pulled my hair into a ponytail and applied light makeup to hide the traces of tears. The mirror reflected a pale but determined woman. I didn't recognize myself, as if something within me had changed forever in these few hours. As I was leaving the apartment, I ran into my neighbor, the same one who had given me a strange look when I was heading to the garage. Tanechka, is everything all right? She asked with genuine concern. You ran out so quickly this morning, I was worried.
Everything's fine, Nina Petrovna, I forced a smile. Just
family matters. She nodded understandingly, but doubt was evident in her eyes. I wondered if she knew anything. Had she seen Masha coming to our place when I wasn't home? I stepped outside and took a deep breath. The day was surprisingly clear and warm. Around this time, the wedding ceremony should have been starting. The guests had probably already received messages about the cancellation. What had they been told? What version had Masha and Sergei come up with?
My parents.
I shuddered, realizing that they too were experiencing shock right now. I needed to call them, but what would I say? How could I explain that my sister and my husband? I couldn't even mentally finish that sentence. I arrived at the cafe earlier than the appointed time. I ordered tea, though I wanted something stronger. There weren't many patrons, a couple in love in the corner, an elderly man with a newspaper, a young mother with a child. Ordinary life that continued despite everything. Kostya appeared exactly at the scheduled time. I recognized him immediately, though I'd only seen him a couple of times. Tall, with dark hair and an open face. Today he looked haggard, with shadows under his eyes. He noticed me and headed toward my table.
Hi, he said, sitting across from me.
Thank you for agreeing to meet. It's me who should thank you, I replied quietly. For the message. Although I won't hide that it was a shock. He gave a cheerless smile. I only found out yesterday. Accidentally saw the messages in her phone when she was taking a shower. She left it in the kitchen, and a message from Sergei came through. He fell silent, as if it pained him to pronounce the name. I read everything. They had been planning this for a long time. How did you get my number? I asked, taking a sip of my now cold tea. I had the guest list with all the contacts. For sending out invitations, he rubbed his temples. When I realized what was happening, my first thought was to call you. But then I decided it would be more illustrative this way. So you could see for yourself. I'm sorry if that was too cruel. I shook my head. No, you did the right thing. Otherwise, I would have lived in illusions for a long time. We fell silent. The waitress brought him coffee, which he had apparently ordered on his way to the table. What did you tell the guests? I finally asked. Nothing. Masha called everyone herself. She said the wedding was cancelled due to personal circumstances. I think she told her parents more. My parents. I felt a lump forming in my throat. They must be horrified. They called me an hour ago, Kostya said quietly. They were looking for Masha. I couldn't tell them everything. I only said that she cancelled the wedding and needed time. I covered my face with my hands. My parents. How will they survive this scandal? 2 daughters, and such a story. You know what's strangest? Kostya suddenly said, putting his cup aside. I don't feel hatred. Only emptiness. as if everything between us was a lie from beginning to end. I raised my eyes and met his gaze, tired but clear.
I understand. The same feeling.
As if the last 5 years of my life were a movie that I watched but never truly lived. We talked for almost 2 hours. About them, about ourselves, about what would happen next. Kostya told me how he proposed to Masha against the backdrop of a sunset in the mountains, how they chose a house together, planned their future. I shared stories from my life with Sergei, our travels, dreams, plans to have a baby next year. Strange, but with each passing minute it became easier. As if by talking it out, we were freeing ourselves from the weight of betrayal that had been pressing down on our shoulders. What will you do now? Kostya asked when we left the cafe.
I shrugged. I don't know.
I'll probably file for divorce.
Find a new apartment.
Start everything from scratch. I'm also thinking of leaving, he said.
Too many memories.
I was offered a job in St. Petersburg 6 months ago, but I turned it down because of the wedding. Now, I think it's the perfect time to accept. We walked slowly down the street, each immersed in our own thoughts. Evening was falling, and the streetlights were coming on. You know, I suddenly said, stopping, I think they did us a favor. Kostya looked at me in surprise. In what way? They freed us from a life with people who didn't love us. Who were capable of such betrayal. Imagine if we had found out about this 10 years later? Or when we already had children.
He pondered, then slowly nodded.
There's something to that. Although right now, this thought doesn't make it any easier. It will. I was surprised by my own confidence.
With time.
My phone rang.
Mom.
I showed the screen to Kostya. I need to answer. And it seems, tell them the truth. He nodded understandingly. Would you like me to go with you? It will be easier to explain together. I smiled gratefully. The thought of not having to face my parents alone unexpectedly brought relief.
Thank you.
I would like that. We headed to my apartment. Fortunately, Sergei and Masha should have already flown out, and there would be no one there. On the way, I gathered my thoughts, trying to find the right words for the conversation with my parents. How do I explain to them that their daughters betrayed each other in the most terrible way? Kostya walked beside me, silently supporting me with his presence. There was something comforting in this silence. We both understood what the other was going through, without the need to put it into words. When we reached my floor, I froze in front of the door, taking out my keys. It was a strange feeling, entering your own home with the thought that it's not entirely yours anymore. That the memories associated with it are poisoned.
Are you okay?
Kostya asked quietly. I nodded and opened the door. The apartment was quiet and empty. On the coffee table, I noticed an envelope with my name written in Sergei's handwriting.
A farewell letter? How noble of him.
May I make some tea? Asked Kostya, tactfully giving me space. Of course, the kitchen is there. I pointed in the direction and sank into the armchair, staring at the envelope. While Kostya was clattering with cups in the kitchen, I opened the envelope. Inside was a short note and apartment keys.
Tanya, forgive us if you can.
The apartment remains yours. I've arranged everything with the notary. The money in your account is the least I can do. I hope someday you'll understand. Sergei. I smiled bitterly.
He hopes for my understanding?
After everything they did? Apparently, his conscience troubled him enough to leave me the apartment and some compensation. As if that could fix anything. Kostya returned with 2 cups of tea and sat down in the armchair opposite me. Did you find anything? I silently handed him the note. He read it and shook his head. Masha also left me a letter. Almost the same one. And the keys to the house we bought before the wedding. They thought through every detail. I took a sip of tea, feeling the hot liquid burn my throat. Even how to make amends for their guilt. My phone rang again. Mom wasn't giving up. I have to answer, I said, taking a deep breath. Kostya nodded encouragingly, and I pressed the answer button.
Tanya. Finally.
Mom's voice sounded worried.
What's going on?
Masha isn't answering her calls, the wedding is cancelled, nobody explains anything. Do you know where she is? I closed my eyes, gathering my strength. Mom, where are you and Dad right now?
At home, of course.
We were supposed to go to the registry office with the guests from Novosibirsk, but then this happened.
Tanya, what's going on?
I'll come and explain everything, I said, understanding that such news shouldn't be delivered over the phone. I'll be there in half an hour. Is Sergei with you? Maybe he knows where Masha is. I exchanged glances with Kostya. No, Sergey is not here. I won't be coming alone, but I'll explain everything when we meet. Please wait for me. Having finished the conversation, I lowered the phone to my knees. Do you really want to go with me? It won't be easy. Kostya finished his tea and set down the cup decisively. I'm sure. We both need to go through this. And it will be easier for your parents if we tell them everything together. On the way to my parents, we hardly talked. I looked out of the taxi window at the city rushing by and thought about how one morning had completely changed my life. Just yesterday I was a happy wife, today, abandoned and betrayed. And yet, a strange calmness began to fill the emptiness inside. Perhaps it was just a defense mechanism, a numbness before the real pain that would come later. My parents' house greeted us with bright windows. Lights were on in all the rooms. I took a deep breath before pressing the doorbell. Kostya stood beside me, and his presence gave me strength. Mom opened the door. Her eyes were red from crying, and an expression of anxiety was frozen on her face. Tanya. She hugged me, then looked at Kostya in surprise. Kostya? What's happening? You were supposed to marry Masha today. Where is she? Where is Sergey? Let's go inside, I said quietly, feeling a lump rising in my throat. We need to talk. I translated the text into English while preserving the literary style and paragraph structure. Father and Uncle Vitya from Novosibirsk were sitting in the living room, the only guest who had managed to arrive before the wedding was cancelled. They rose to meet us, and from their faces, I understood they were expecting the most terrible news. What happened? Father asked, shifting his gaze from me to Kostya. An accident? Is Masha in the hospital? I shook my head and sat down on the sofa. Kostya settled beside me. No. Dad. Masha is fine. Physically, at least. Then where is she? Mom nervously wrung her hands. And why is the wedding cancelled? I gathered my courage and uttered the words that would change our family forever. Masha flew away with Sergey. They're having an affair. It's been going on for a long time. The silence that hung in the room felt tangible. Mom slowly sank into the armchair, not taking her incredulous gaze off me. What are you saying? Her voice trembled. This must be some mistake. Sergey is your husband, and Masha. It's true, Kostya interjected. I discovered their correspondence yesterday. They were planning to run away together right after the wedding that never happened. Tickets to Barcelona, an apartment. Everything was ready. Father turned pale and sank heavily into a chair. It can't be, he whispered. Our daughters. How is this possible? Uncle Vitya tactfully stood up. I think I'll go to my room. This is a family matter. When he left, I told my parents everything, about the message from Kostya, about the garage, the suitcases and documents, about meeting Sergey and Masha. With each word, my parents' faces grew more and more shocked. They flew away this evening, I concluded. And left us. Their apologies. Mom covered her face with her hands and burst into tears. Father sat motionless, as if turned to stone. How could she? Mom said through tears. Her own sister. How could Sergey do this to you? You were happy together. I thought so too, I answered quietly. Apparently, I was mistaken. And you, Kostya, Father finally found his voice. You were supposed to get married today. What a blow for you. Kostya nodded, his face tense. I loved Masha. Or thought I did. Now I don't know anymore. We sat with my parents until late at night. They called Masha, but her phone was turned off. They sent messages that remained unanswered. Mom cried, Father grimly kept silent, occasionally getting up to pour himself a shot of vodka. I felt strangely detached, as if everything was happening to someone else. Perhaps it was my mind's defense mechanism, too many shocks for one day. When Kostya and I finally prepared to leave, Mom hugged me tightly. Stay with us, she whispered. Don't go back to that apartment today. I shook my head. I need to be alone, Mom. To process everything. Besides, that apartment is now only mine. I have to get used to it. I'll walk Tanya out, Kostya said to his parents. And I'll make sure she gets home safely. In the taxi we were silent again. I looked at the night city and thought about tomorrow being a new day. The first day of my new life. Thank you for being with me today, I said as we pulled up to my house. Kostya smiled weakly. It's me who should be thanking you. I don't know how I would have handled this day alone. There was such sincerity in his eyes that I couldn't help but feel warmth. Strange, but next to someone I barely knew, I felt more at ease than with anyone else. Would you like some tea? I offered, surprising myself. I don't want to be alone in an empty apartment right away. He nodded, and I saw in his gaze the same reluctance to return to solitude. After entering the apartment, the first thing I did was take off my shoes and turn on the light. The space that had seemed familiar and cozy just this morning now looked foreign. Photos on the walls, souvenirs from our travels together, Sergei's books on the shelves, all of it seemed to belong to another life, another Tanya. Make yourself at home, I said to Kostya, pointing to the sofa. I'll make some tea. In the kitchen, I mechanically took out cups, brewed tea, and arranged cookies on a plate. Ordinary actions that helped me not to think about what had happened. At least for a few minutes. When I returned to the living room with the tray, I saw Kostya standing by the bookshelf, looking at photographs. Sorry, he said, noticing me. I just saw your wedding photo. You looked happy. I put the tray on the coffee table and walked over to him. In the photograph, Sergei and I stood under an arch of flowers, smiling at each other. Me in a white dress, him in a formal suit. The perfect couple. You know what's strangest? I said quietly. I was genuinely happy that day. And I think he was too. When did everything change? Kostya carefully took the photograph and placed it face down. Maybe nothing changed, he said thoughtfully. Maybe we just saw what we wanted to see. We sat on the couch and silently drank tea for a while. There was something comforting in this silence. No need to pretend, to choose words carefully, to explain our feelings. We both understood what the other was going through. Have you decided when you're going to St. Petersburg? I asked, breaking the silence. He shook his head. No. First I need to settle things here. The house that Masha and I bought. I don't know what to do with it. Sell it, probably. I have the same problem with my apartment. I glanced around the room. Too many memories. But nowhere to go either. Maybe it's for the best. Kostya set aside his empty cup. A new place, new people. A chance to start with a clean slate. I couldn't help but smile. Sounds tempting. Especially now. My phone vibrated. A message from Mom. How are you, sweetheart? If you need anything, we're here for you. Love you. I showed the screen to Kostya. It's not easy for them either. Both daughters in one day. One a traitor, the other, an abandoned wife. They love you, he said quietly. That's what matters most. I haven't even told my parents yet. They're on vacation in Turkey, and I don't want to ruin their holiday. I suddenly caught myself thinking that I knew almost nothing about Kostya, except that he was supposed to marry my sister. What did he do for work? What did he like? What were his dreams? Before, these questions didn't matter. He was just Masha's fiancé, a figure on the periphery of my life. Now we found ourselves connected by a shared trauma, and I felt a strange desire to get to know him better. Tell me about yourself, I asked. What do you do? Besides almost marrying my sister, I added with a bitter smile. He smiled back, with the same forced smile. I'm an architect. I work at a small firm. We mainly design private homes and small public buildings. In St. Petersburg, I was offered a position at a large company that specializes in the restoration of historical buildings. That sounds interesting, I said sincerely. Why did you turn it down? Masha didn't want to move, he shrugged. She had her job here, friends. At least, that's what she said. Now I understand that wasn't the real reason. I sighed. Of course, the real reason was Sergei. Masha couldn't leave him. What about you? Kostya asked. What do you do? I teach at an art school. Drawing, art history. Nothing special, but I enjoy working with children. Are you an artist? He asked with interest. May I see your works? I felt embarrassed. It had been a long time since anyone had shown interest in my creative endeavors. Sergei had lately only nodded politely when I showed him my new drawings. They're not very good, I warned, but still got up and went to the cabinet where I kept my portfolio of drawings. Kostya examined each work carefully, asked questions, and shared his impressions. His interest seemed genuine, and I felt the tension of this terrible day gradually releasing its grip on me. We talked until late into the night, about work, books, films, and plans for the future. We carefully avoided the topic of Sergei and Masha, although their ghosts were invisibly present in every pause, in every unspoken word. When the clock showed 3 in the morning, Kostya suddenly realized. God, I've completely talked you to death. You must be tired and want to rest.
I shook my head. Actually, no. I feel better when you're around.
I don't have to be alone with my thoughts. He nodded understandingly.
I do too.
But it's already late. I'll call a taxi. You can stay, I offered, surprising myself. In the guest room. If you want to, of course. Kostya was silent for a moment, clearly hesitating.
Are you sure?
I don't want to impose. I'm sure, I said firmly. Besides, it's difficult to find a taxi now, and the metro is already closed. He smiled gratefully, and I felt a strange relief at the thought that I wouldn't remain alone in this apartment filled with memories. I made up the bed for him in the guest room, brought a towel and a spare toothbrush. All this time we talked about trivial matters, avoiding the main topic that had led us into this situation. Good night, I said, standing in the doorway of the guest room.
And
thank you for being here for me today.
Good night, Tanya, he replied softly.
Tomorrow will be a new day.
For both of us.
I nodded and closed the door. In my bedroom, I stood for a long time, staring at the bed I had shared with Sergei just yesterday. Then I resolutely removed the bedspread, pillows, blanket, everything he had touched, and threw them on the floor. I took fresh linens from the closet and made the bed anew. A small ritual of cleansing, which, however, brought little relief.
I lay down, but sleep wouldn't come.
Fragments of today's events swirled in my head, phrases, glances, details I hadn't noticed before. How long had they been together? 1.5 years, Sergei had said. 1.5 years of lies, betrayal, a double life.
And I hadn't seen any of it.
I remembered family dinners where Masha and Sergei sat next to each other, discussing some films or books. I remembered how he volunteered to drive her home when I couldn't. How they sometimes called each other, for work, Sergei would say. All the signs had been right before my eyes, but I was blind. Sleep came only near morning, heavy and restless. I dreamed of a registry office, Masha in a wedding dress, Sergei in a groom's suit. I stood among the guests trying to scream that it was all a mistake, that